Welcome back. The African Union just concluded an extraordinary summit in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. Issues of political change on the continent, sustainable finances, issues around humanitarian situations and conflicts on the continent were all discussed. Here to expand this conversation are a commentator and a lecturer at the Department of International Relations and Diplomacy, Baze University, ABUJA, Dr. ADOYI Matthew Omale. It's good to have you on the show.
Good evening, and I'm pleased to be here.
Good, pleasure. Also, our next guest has a master's degree in political science, international relations to be precise, from the University of Ibadan. He has been in development work since 1998. He has worked for both local and international non-governmental organizations such as International Foundation for Electoral Systems. He's also worked for the United Nations Development Program, to be precise, the UNDP Democratic Governance for Development Project, amongst others. Mr. JIDE OJO, it's good to have you. Welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me. Good evening. Happy weekend.
Same to you, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Omale, Africans will be asking, every time African leaders are organizing very expensive African Union summits, we don't seem to see the results of this expensive summit happening in Africa. When we see them at all, they are very slow in coming. Is there any use and any purpose for this very expensive meetings?
Yes, we are aware that several year in, year out, these meetings are held under the auspices of the African Union. And one thing is that, yes, meetings are good. Meetings, if you don't discuss issues, how do you get solution to those issues? So as long as the African Union exists, and as long as countries continue to interact within the continent and beyond, this type of meetings we continue to hold. And it is very important, because the more you sit down to articulate issues, to brainstorm, and come out to discuss how you will solve your problem, the better for the entire society.
Okay.
So diplomacy, in terms of international relations and diplomacy, these organizational meetings are very, very critical in having a holistic approach to tackling problems that affect the various countries.
All right, Mr. Joe, is this your perspective? I mean, we've commensurate to what we put into these meetings, do we seem to get enough out that keeps moving Africa, that justifies these things?
Well, no, I'm not sure anybody has done a kind of monitoring and evaluation of those meetings. But the popular saying is that it's better to JOJO than to war. And this is meeting of sovereigns.
Yes.
So you can only speak and try to reach consensus on issues of interest.
Yeah.
And the whole essence of even establishing the Organization of African Unity in 1963, and later on changing the name to African Union, was basically to have a forum where issues will be discussed, thrashed out, and decisions will be taken and follow up with a number of actions. The issue that is debatable is the follow-up actions. How much of that have we seen? And what have been the impact of those follow-up actions?
Okay.
Let me cite very quickly an instance. We've been talking of having a standby force for African Union forever. It has never taken.
We like to JOJO, as you say.
So it's just like a paper tiger is there, agreement has been reached, but funding becomes an issue, and it's been there. And then you have this, snowballing issue of terrorism, it's snowballing issue of change of government and all of that. So it's through decision making, through JOJOing, through discussions, that such decisions are taken. Okay, you want to establish multinational joint task force. You want to, adopt a year of silencing the gun. All of those things have to be done
at this particular platform.
At meetings. But the impact, what impact have these meetings, what impact have they achieved? More so when many of the countries are not playing their role in terms of funding. The organization.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I'm going to move on to something he mentioned, Dr. Omale. He talked about terrorism and the snowball effect it has on many things. Right now, we're talking about the humanitarian crisis in Africa, and those are one of the offshoots of it. How bad is the humanitarian crisis in Africa at this point in time?
No doubt, it has reached a very, very alarming proportion.
Okay.
As we speak, we have about 40 million refugees across Africa.
Okay.
From Nigeria to the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, we have a lot of displaced persons. Internally, in most of the countries, there are pockets of conflicts. Look at Nigeria, for example. The Boko Haram conflict has displaced a lot of people in the northeast region of Nigeria. Look at in the middle belt part of Nigeria, the farmers' herders clashes has displaced a lot of families, and they are all in the IDP camps. When you go to Cameroon, the conflict in Cameroon has led a lot of Cameroonians to be refugees. So across the continent, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and it's really alarming. And if Africa do not take a proactive measure to curtail this spate of conflict that is leading to this refugee crisis, then in a short while, the whole country, the whole continent will be up in flames. Secondly, climate change.
Okay.
Climate change have led to a lot of displacement of persons.
Okay.
If you look from the Sahara, fringes of the Sahara Desert, to lack of rainfall in most of the communities, you discover that climate change, look at the Lake Chad, it's virtually gone. And people are moving to other areas where they can be able to carry out their fishing activities and so on and so forth. So there are areas that even rainfall. Northern part of Cameroon is completely dry. There's clashes between the fishermen and the local farmers. So all this cumulatively has made the refugee crisis, the humanitarian crisis in Africa to be very, very serious. And I think at the Malabo conference, all this have been put on the front burner, and the African leaders know that they are sitting on the keg of gunpowder. If these humanitarian issues are not tackled frontally, we are heading to a disaster. Countries were pledging money. The president of Cameroon dropped about 500 CFA for the fund to fund humanitarian activities. In Nigeria, a lot has happened. The school feeding program, which was to cater for displaced persons, stipends were being given to Nigerians that have been displaced and are staying in IDP camp. Government has been spending a lot of money. If you listen to the president's address, President Muhammadu Buhari's address at the summit, he talked about how the Nigerian government have been doing their best to make sure that the IDPs, the displaced persons, are taken care of. But it is very expensive for government.
It is extremely expensive. Mr. Ojo, you've heard him talk about, in fact, he went into my previous question where I was going to ask a bit about the causes of some of these humanitarian crises. Now, he's talked about them extensively, talked about terrorism, talked about climate change that has affected a lot of people, and we are here again talking. Is there realistically any hope in sight to resolve these problems, considering the mechanisms of AU and the way Africans have always handled governance?
I wish I could hazard a very optimistic guess, but it doesn't seem to appear on the horizon. It may be a wishful thinking of sorts, because I've not seen demonstrable effort on part of leaders. One, we are disunited. We just talk of African Union or Organization of Africa. There's no unity of purpose. It's pull and push. Some of us, some African leaders, have become minions of Western powers. And when you look at even part of the challenge that led us into this humanitarian crisis, were foreign imposed. Who led the regime change in Libya in 2011? That led to the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, that led to the domino effect, you know, the spiral effect of, you know, proliferation of small arms and light weapons all across Africa. Is it not the Western world? You know, the same thing they did in Middle East rather, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, weapon of mass destruction, found and not found and all of that. And then you look at even France, the influence of France in some Francophone countries. You recall that is in Niger or Mali that pulled out of G5, you know, very recently. And some of the coups, as we know it to be, were sponsored by Western countries.
So essentially you were saying that our problems are multiplying and the causes of our problems are multiplying.
They are not only national or international, but they are foreign. Okay, you have foreign mercenaries who come in to help us fight some of our local issues. Issues around insurgency and all of that. I recall very recently the National Assembly was it National Assembly or there was some kite flying about the need for us to have private military companies to come and help us. And I said,
that's a very dangerous road to tread.
Very dangerous road to tread. Because when these people leave, we see, okay, Goodluck Jonathan brought them in at some point before the 2015 elections. After they left, what happened? Snowballing of the insurgency after the incoming administration and all that. So by and large, if I may land on my thought, I think coming back to your question about whether there is end in sight, African leaders must first have the political will to deal with their own internal issues. And stop encouraging Western powers, or running to them for help. Because what I've seen happen is that there's no free lunch in Freetown. when you bring them in, there are terms and conditions attached to some of the assistance and support they give. So then there is a wider issue of poverty, unemployment that, we are not really paying much attention. It's just like paying lip service.
But in Nigeria, there's been a lot of social development programs.
Social investment programs.
Okay, I think Mr. Omale wants to come in here.
What I want to say is that we are playing a blame game. And we are playing, most times when I teach in the classroom, I tell my students, most times we attribute our problems in Africa to colonialism, imperialism, to, foreign interference and things like that. I think we are being very, very naive in looking at the issues. We are not holding our leaders accountable, and that is the pure fact. Africans, we are too docile. We take anything that anybody is telling us. We are not ready to move. But a lot has happened since the revolution in telecommunications.
Okay.
Africa of today is different from Africa of 10 years ago.
It is.
The African of the era of Mobutu Sese Seko, Humphrey Mogli, and all those sit-tight leaders that spent 30 years, 40 years, all their lifetime. And so Africa is moving. And it only takes, like Jide said, the political will to carry out a wholesale...
That's my question to you. Yeah. How do we get the political will? Traditionally, crisis in Africa is looked at by the political class as an opportunity to make money. Now, so when this large-scale crisis comes, this is an opportunity to make large-scale money. So how do we move from that place to the place we need to get to?
The question you have asked is very germane. We have a lot to do.
Yeah.
The African Union is trying that, but in the past, there will be military coup in Africa, and the African Union will not even stand up to even condemn it. At least the African Union is condemning military coup, now even suspending Guinea, suspending Mali, suspending. This is the first time that is happening within the African Union. The African leaders themselves are now standing up to
condemn these things. Now, I'm going to pause that thought
then
and drag you in here, Mr. Ojo, if you don't mind. Now, he says something. For the first time in a while, we're seeing African leaders come together and condemn these things and try to, in some cases, prefer even sanctions to punish countries or military people who take over countries. Some would argue, as one has said in an African proverb, that for me, some people say better late than never. He says better never than late. Some people say never than late. So is this too little too late? Are we patting ourselves on the back for starting a race that people are more than halfway the finish line?
Well, I don't know whether condemnation and sanctions have worked.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, it's not today that those condemnations and sanctions have been imposed. Whether you talk of Niger, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso and all of that. You've had issues, even when Zimbabwean Robert Mugabe, African Union will issue statements condemning.
But it hasn't quite gotten the result.
But what I'm saying is that look at the situation in Mali.
Yeah.
You suspend these people, you give them timeline within which to restore civil rule, and they call your bluff and said, look, you can't dictate to us. We are a sovereign country. We are a sovereign country. So what I'm saying is that our sanctions and our condemnations have not been as effective. Maybe it's a very good way to start. I mean, taking it away from the policy of non-interference that we know OAU to be for many decades.
Yes.
So
to that extent, we can praise them. But
you know, and I will not blame African Union alone. Because even with what is happening in Ukraine and Russia, with all the impositions...
I was about to say that global politics seems to have shifted quite a bit.
Made Russia to back down on Russia in spite of imposition of sanctions. So it takes a while for sanctions to actually be effective. And then the sanctions are not also effective because of the porosity of our border, because there is a lot of smuggling.
All right. We just have about a minute and a half or thereabout. So I'm going to, unfortunately, there's much we wanted to talk about we haven't covered yet. I was going to talk about issues of sustainable financing in Africa and the fear of another set of colonization of some sort, whether by corporate entities who begin to own much of Africans and their earnings in the future. So in just like 30 minutes, I'm going to ask, is the future of Africa mortally threatened by this situation? And what can be done to move forward? In about 30 seconds each.
Yes, Africa is definitely threatened. The level of quantum funding from the European Union, China, and others, especially the activities of the African Union, it gives me a lot of cause to worry. And even the management, the accountability within the African Union system. For example, the funds for peace and security have been lying there about $235 million that was supposed to be used to finance peace activities, especially in conflict areas.
Yeah.
These funds have been, because of bickering among the African Union to see how these funds can be managed, because we have problem of management within the subcontinent. Funds that have been put together, issue of corruption within the system, issues of mismanagement,
10 seconds.
Embezzlement of public funds. So we have to put mechanisms in place, especially within the African Union Commission, to make sure that whatever funds, these funds are scarce. We cannot be relying on donor funding, and then when this funding comes in, it is misappropriated.
Thank you,
so
sir.
We have to curtail those excesses.
Thank you, Dr. Omale. Mr. Ojo?
Well, for me, I think I would take it on the other side. Terrorism financing, how do we snuff the oxygen of that? I think it's a huge challenge because these terrorist groups that are metatizing, is that the appropriate word, like cancer, they get funded. And we have not been able to do something, even with the use of technology, to be able to track and cut off this terrorism financing, illicit financial flow in and out of Africa has been part of the problem. Dr. Omale raised a very salient point. If you see the amount of export of capital out of Africa by our leaders, you know, and being stockpiled in Swiss bank, in abroad, you wonder whether we even are deserving of the foreign aids that we get.
All right.
Because these people see us, they know how much of our own stolen wealth that we are keeping in their own vaults.
So
we need to deal with that issue. As well as you know, the wider issue of when there are steps being taken by leaders to undermine their own constitution. That is when African Union should stand, rise, and condemn. Not when the days have been done. Look at what Alpha Conde did in his
because of time.
You know, tinkering with the constitution to allow him for third term. I think it should
I would love this conversation to go. In fact, we probably will need a whole show of 1 hour to probably trash out some of this issue. But Mr. Joe, it's been a pleasure. Dr. Omale, it's been wonderful having you sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom on this particular manner. Now we want to check out a few things on social media, seeing what our people are saying. Today I go to Facebook and Lens on Africa. All right, Lens on Africa. Well, thank you very much. Yes, you said you just watched the show. Issues on Africa get you unhappy and you don't know what to do. Well, Tunde, well, that's why you watch the show, and that's why you're a young leader. You know, you pick up, you find the problem. Problems are usually opportunities, so we pick up the opportunity and we find the solution, and that's how things move on. I hear Zainab. Zainab is calling all the way, is sending a message from Zaria. Okay, Zainab is sending a message from Zaria. You say you love our show. You wonder when we're going to come to Zaria. Well, Zainab, well, if you invite us and you promise me proper tour, I think I can convince my producers to come over to Zaria. Thank you, Zainab. We like your watching, and keep watching, and so we can enjoy the show. We have Bature. Bature is from Nasarawa. Nasarawa, you said, yeah, Bature, we've been to Nasarawa before. We covered a fantastic waterfall in Nasarawa State, Nigeria, and we hope to do that again. Well, I don't have much time. That's all I can take. For all of you who sent us messages on social media, thank you very much. Keep sending them and we will keep reading them. Well, that's about how much 1 hour can take. It's so short when you're doing something you enjoy and something interesting. See you same time next week. From the producer, director, keep making Africa proud.